Sarah Martinez had always dreamed of serving her country. Growing up in a small town in Texas, she watched military parades with stars in her eyes and promised herself that one day she would wear the uniform. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, had mixed feelings about his daughter's military ambitions. He knew the honor that came with service, but he also understood the sacrifices and dangers. When Sarah turned 18, she walked into the Navy recruitment office with determination burning in her chest. The recruiter, a stern-faced woman named Chief Petty Officer Johnson, looked her up and down before asking the question that would change everything. "What do you want to do in the Navy, young lady?" Without hesitation, Sarah replied, "I want to serve on the front lines. I want to make a real difference." Chief Johnson smiled for the first time during their meeting. She had seen thousands of recruits come through those doors, but few had the fire she saw in Sarah's eyes. Within weeks, Sarah was on her way to basic training, leaving behind her comfortable life and stepping into a world that would test every fiber of her being. Basic training was brutal. The drill instructors pushed the recruits beyond their limits, testing not just their physical strength but their mental resilience. Sarah struggled at first, her small frame making some of the physical challenges seem impossible. Other recruits whispered that she wouldn't make it through the first month. But Sarah had something they didn't see, an unbreakable spirit and a refusal to give up. During one particularly difficult training exercise, Sarah's squad was tasked with carrying a wounded teammate across a muddy obstacle course while under simulated enemy fire. The wounded recruit was a large man named Thompson, who outweighed Sarah by nearly 50 pounds. When it was her turn to carry him, the other recruits exchanged doubtful glances. "I've got this," Sarah said firmly, hoisting Thompson onto her shoulders. Step by step, she trudged through the mud, her legs shaking with the effort. When she stumbled and fell, Thompson started to get up to help her, but she shook her head. "Stay down. You're wounded, remember?" With mud covering her face and her muscles screaming in protest, Sarah got back up and continued until she crossed the finish line. That day, she earned the respect of her fellow recruits and her drill instructors, but more importantly, she proved to herself that she could overcome any obstacle through sheer determination and heart. After graduating from basic training, Sarah specialized in communications technology, a field that would prove crucial to her future mission. She excelled in her technical training, mastering complex radio systems and satellite communications equipment. Her instructors noted her exceptional ability to remain calm under pressure and her innovative problem-solving skills. Sarah's first assignment was aboard the USS Steadfast, a destroyer that patrolled international waters. Life at sea was different from anything she had imagined. The ship became her world, and her fellow sailors became her family. She quickly distinguished herself as someone who could be relied upon in any situation. Whether it was fixing a broken communication system in the middle of a storm, or mediating disputes between crew members. During her second year aboard the Steadfast, the ship received orders that would test everyone's courage. Intelligence reports indicated that a group of American civilians, including several children, were being held captive by hostile forces on a small island in the Pacific. The situation was delicate. Any large-scale military operation might result in the hostages being harmed or killed. Captain Rodriguez, the ship's commanding officer, called for volunteers for a dangerous reconnaissance mission. The plan was risky. A small team would infiltrate the island, assess the situation, and establish communication with Naval Command to coordinate a rescue operation. The mission required someone with excellent technical skills and the courage to operate behind enemy lines. Sarah stepped forward immediately. "I volunteer, sir." The captain studied her carefully. He had watched her grow from a nervous recruit into a capable sailor, but this mission was unlike anything she had faced before. "Martinez, this isn't a training exercise. If you're captured, we might not be able to extract you." "I understand, sir. Those people need our help, and I have the skills to make this mission succeed." Captain Rodriguez nodded slowly. He knew Sarah was right. Her combination of technical expertise and unwavering courage made her the best choice for the mission. But he also knew he might be sending one of his finest sailors into a situation from which she might not return. The next few days were spent in intensive preparation. Sarah studied satellite images of the island, memorized radio frequencies, and practiced with specialized equipment that would allow her to maintain contact with the ship while remaining undetected. She also spent time with the ship's medical officer, learning basic first aid techniques that might be crucial if she encountered injured hostages. As the day of the mission approached, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and fear. She knew the risks, but she also knew that innocent lives hung in the balance. Her fellow crew members watched her with a combination of admiration and worry. Thompson, the same recruit she had carried during basic training, approached her the night before the mission. "Martinez, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. We all know how tough you are." Sarah smiled at her friend. "This isn't about proving anything, Thompson. It's about doing what's right. Those people are counting on us." The night before the mission, Sarah lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling. She thought about her family back in Texas, wondering if she would ever see them again. She thought about the hostages on the island, frightened and hoping for rescue. Most of all, she thought about the oath she had taken when she joined the Navy, to defend her country and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. As dawn broke over the Pacific, Sarah prepared for what would become the most important mission of her career. She checked her equipment one final time, said a quiet prayer, and made her way to the deck where a small boat waited to take her to the island. The next few hours would test everything she had learned and everything she believed about duty, courage, and sacrifice. Captain Rodriguez met her at the boat. "Remember, Martinez, your job is reconnaissance and communication. Don't try to be a hero." Sarah nodded, but they both knew that sometimes the line between following orders and doing what's right becomes blurred in the heat of the moment. As the boat disappeared into the morning mist, carrying Sarah toward an uncertain fate, the crew of the Steadfast could only wait and pray that their brave shipmate would complete her mission and return home safely. The island grew larger on the horizon, and with it the greatest challenge of Sarah's young life. The rubber boat cut through the choppy waters as Sarah approached the hostile island. Her heart pounded against her chest, but her hands remained steady on her equipment. The island looked peaceful from a distance, with its palm trees swaying in the morning breeze and white sandy beaches. But Sarah knew that beneath this tropical paradise lay a dangerous situation that had already claimed the freedom of innocent people. Lieutenant Commander Williams, who was piloting the boat, spoke in hushed tones. "Remember, Martinez, we'll drop you at the North Beach. It's the most secluded spot according to our intel. You'll have exactly 72 hours to gather information and establish communication protocols. If we don't hear from you by then, we'll assume the worst." Sarah nodded, checking her waterproof communication equipment one more time. The device was her lifeline, a specially modified radio that could transmit burst communications to the USS Steadfast without being easily detected by enemy equipment. She also carried a small medical kit, emergency rations for 3 days, and a sidearm that she hoped she wouldn't need to use. As they neared the shore, Williams cut the engine and let the boat drift toward the beach. The silence was broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the hull. Sarah scanned the tree line with binoculars, looking for any signs of enemy activity. Everything appeared quiet, but she knew that appearances could be deceiving. "This is it, Martinez. Good luck, and remember, reconnaissance only. Don't take any unnecessary risks." Sarah slipped over the side of the boat into the shallow water, her equipment secured in a waterproof pack. The warm Pacific water soaked through her dark clothing as she waded toward shore. Behind her, she could hear the quiet hum of the boat's engine as Williams began his journey back to the ship. She was now completely on her own. The beach was silent except for the sound of waves and the distant call of tropical birds. Sarah moved quickly but carefully toward the jungle, her boots leaving temporary impressions in the wet sand. Once she reached the cover of the dense vegetation, she paused to get her bearings and check her equipment. According to the intelligence briefing, the hostages were being held in a compound approximately 2 miles inland. The captors were believed to be a small but well-armed group of extremists who had taken the Americans during a humanitarian mission gone wrong. The hostages included a doctor, 2 nurses, a teacher, and 3 children ranging in age from 8 to 14. Sarah began her careful trek through the jungle, using a compass and landmarks to navigate. The vegetation was thick, and the humidity made every step feel like she was walking through soup. Insects buzzed around her head, and she had to resist the urge to swat at them for fear of making noise that might give away her position. After 2 hours of slow, methodical movement, Sarah reached a ridge that overlooked the compound. What she saw through her binoculars made her stomach tighten with concern. The compound was larger than expected, with several buildings surrounded by a tall fence topped with razor wire. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, and she could see at least 12 men carrying automatic weapons. But what worried her most were the conditions she observed. Through a window of one building, she caught a glimpse of the hostages. They appeared to be crammed into a single room, and from what she could see, at least one person appeared to be injured. The children huddled close to the adults, their faces showing the strain of their captivity. Sarah found a concealed position among the rocks and dense foliage where she could observe the compound while remaining hidden. She spent the next several hours documenting the guards' patrol patterns, counting weapons and trying to identify the best possible approach routes for a rescue operation. Every detail could be crucial for the mission's success. As evening approached, Sarah established communication with the USS Steadfast. Using her burst transmission radio, she sent coded messages describing the situation. The response from Captain Rodriguez was immediate. The intelligence had underestimated both the number of captors and the complexity of the compound. A direct assault would be extremely risky, potentially resulting in casualties among both the hostages and the rescue team. That night, as Sarah lay hidden in her observation post, she watched the compound with growing concern. She could see lights in the building where the hostages were held and occasionally heard voices, some speaking in English, others in a language she didn't recognize. The guards seemed relaxed, suggesting they didn't believe anyone knew their location. Around midnight, Sarah witnessed something that changed everything. One of the guards dragged a small figure, one of the children, from the hostage building to another structure. The child was clearly terrified, and Sarah could hear crying even from her distant position. Her training told her to observe and report, but every instinct in her body screamed at her to act. She radioed the ship with an urgent update, describing what she had witnessed. The response was swift and clear: maintain position and continue surveillance. Under no circumstances was she to compromise her location or attempt any rescue action on her own. But as the hours passed, Sarah's resolve began to waver. Through her binoculars, she could see that the conditions in the compound were deteriorating. The hostages appeared to have little food or water, and the injured person seemed to be getting worse. She realized that a traditional rescue operation might take days to organize and execute, time that these people might not have. On her second day, Sarah observed a pattern that gave her an idea. Every morning at dawn, most of the guards gathered at the front gate for what appeared to be a morning briefing. For about 15 minutes, only 2 guards remained to watch the rear of the compound. The building where the hostages were held was closest to this back section. Sarah began to formulate a plan that went against everything in her training manual. She could create a diversion at the front of the compound, drawing the guards away from the hostage building. If she could get the prisoners out during the confusion, she might be able to lead them to a predetermined extraction point where the Navy could pick them up. The plan was incredibly risky. She would be outnumbered 12-1, operating in unfamiliar territory with limited ammunition and no backup. If anything went wrong, she would likely be killed or captured, and the hostages might face even worse treatment as punishment for the escape attempt. But as Sarah watched a guard strike one of the adult hostages for no apparent reason, her decision crystallized. These people had already suffered enough. They had come to this island to help others, and now they were paying a terrible price for their compassion. She couldn't stand by and watch while innocent people, including children, were abused and possibly killed. That night, Sarah made her final preparations. She checked her equipment, planned her escape routes, and sent what might be her last communication to the USS Steadfast. In her message, she reported on the deteriorating conditions in the compound and requested immediate extraction support at coordinates she specified on the opposite side of the island. What she didn't include in her official report was her intention to attempt a rescue operation at dawn. She knew that Captain Rodriguez would order her to maintain her position if he knew what she was planning. But sometimes, Sarah realized, following orders wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to follow your conscience, even if it meant risking everything. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the jungle canopy, Sarah moved into position for what would either be the most heroic or the most foolish action of her military career. Dawn was breaking over the island as Sarah crept through the underbrush toward the compound. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her mind was crystal clear. She had spent the entire night going over every detail of her plan, and now it was time to put everything on the line. At exactly 600 hours, just as she had observed for the past 2 days, the guards gathered at the front gate for their morning briefing. Sarah watched through her binoculars as 10 of the 12 men clustered around their leader, leaving only 2 guards patrolling the rear perimeter. This was her window of opportunity. Moving with the stealth she had learned during her advanced training, Sarah approached the back fence of the compound. The razor wire at the top looked menacing, but she had noticed a section where the fence posts were slightly loose. Using her multi-tool, she carefully worked at the fence until she created a gap just large enough for a person to squeeze through. The first part of her plan involved creating a diversion at the front of the compound. Sarah had prepared several small explosive charges using materials from her emergency kit. Not enough to seriously hurt anyone, but sufficient to create noise and confusion. She set these charges near the fuel storage tanks at the front of the compound, using timers to ensure they would detonate in sequence. With the charges in place, Sarah made her way to the building where the hostages were being held. Through a small window, she could see all 7 prisoners huddled together in a single room. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the mission leader, was tending to one of the nurses who appeared to have a fever. The 3 children sat close together, their eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. Sarah tapped gently on the window. Dr. Chen looked up, startled, and Sarah put her finger to her lips before motioning for the doctor to come closer. When Dr. Chen approached the window, Sarah whispered urgently, "I'm with the U.S. Navy. We're going to get you out of here. But you need to do exactly what I say." The relief on Dr. Chen's face was immediately replaced by concern. "There are guards everywhere. How can we possibly escape? In about 3 minutes, there's going to be a loud explosion at the front of the compound. When that happens, I need you to get everyone ready to move. Can the injured nurse walk?" Dr. Chen nodded. "She's weak, but she can manage short distances." Sarah quickly explained the escape route. They would exit through the rear window, move through the gap in the fence, and then follow a path through the jungle to a clearing where Navy helicopters would extract them. The entire operation would need to be completed in less than 10 minutes before the guards could organize a proper search. Just as Sarah finished explaining the plan, the first explosion echoed across the compound. Shouts and running footsteps could be heard as the guards rushed toward the front gate. Sarah used her knife to cut through the window screen while Dr. Chen organized the other hostages. "Everybody out, quickly and quietly," Sarah whispered, as she helped the first child through the window. The little girl, no more than 8 years old, looked at Sarah with complete trust as she was lifted to safety. One by one, the hostages climbed through the window. The injured nurse needed assistance, and Sarah practically carried her through the opening. Dr. Chen came last, pausing only to grab a small medical bag that contained essential supplies. Sarah led the group toward the fence, constantly checking over her shoulder for signs of pursuit. The second and third explosions had created chaos at the front of the compound, but she knew the guards would soon realize that no real attack was taking place and would begin searching for the source of the distraction. Getting 7 people through the narrow gap in the fence took precious minutes. Sarah had to widen the opening further, and the razor wire caught on clothing and skin. The youngest child began to cry softly, and Sarah knelt down beside him. "Hey there, what's your name?" she whispered. "Tommy," the boy replied, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "Well, Tommy, we're playing a game of hide and seek right now. We need to be really quiet so the bad guys can't find us. Can you do that for me?" Tommy nodded bravely, and Sarah felt a surge of admiration for the courage these children were showing under such terrifying circumstances. Once everyone was through the fence, Sarah took point and began leading the group through the jungle toward the extraction point. The path she had chosen was difficult but concealed, winding through dense vegetation that would make them harder to track. Behind them, Sarah could hear angry shouts as the guards discovered the empty hostage building. It wouldn't be long before they organized search parties and came after them. The group needed to move faster, but the injured nurse was struggling to keep up and the children were tiring quickly. Dr. Chen moved up beside Sarah. "How far to the extraction point?" "About 1.5 miles. Can your people make it?" "They'll have to. We've all come too far to give up now." Sarah admired the doctor's determination. Dr. Chen had been captured while leading a humanitarian mission to provide medical care to remote villages. Even after days of captivity and abuse, She remained focused on protecting her team and the children who had been caught up in the situation. 20 minutes into their jungle trek, Sarah heard the sounds she had been dreading: dogs barking and men shouting orders. The guards had organized a search party and were using tracking dogs to follow their trail. The group would never be able to outrun their pursuers, especially with an injured person and 3 children. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She stopped the group at a small stream and turned to face Dr. Chen. Listen carefully. Follow this stream for about half a mile until you reach a large clearing with a fallen tree across the middle. That's the extraction point. Stay hidden until you see Navy helicopters with American markings. Where are you going? Dr. Chen asked, though from Sarah's expression she already knew the answer. I'm going to buy you time. The dogs are tracking our scent, so I'm going to lead them away from you. Once you reach the stream, they'll lose your trail. The teacher, a woman named Mrs. Patterson, grabbed Sarah's arm. You can't do this alone. There are too many of them. Sarah smiled grimly. I'm not planning to fight them all. I just need to keep them busy long enough for you to reach the extraction point. She checked her watch. The helicopters should arrive in about 40 minutes. That's all the time I need to give you. Before anyone could protest further, Sarah handed Dr. Chen her emergency radio. If something goes wrong, this will connect you directly to the USS Steadfast. Tell them Martinez sent you. Sarah watched as the group waded into the stream and began making their way toward safety. Tommy turned back once to wave at her, and Sarah waved back, hoping it wouldn't be the last time she saw the brave little boy. Then she turned and began running back toward their pursuers. The dogs were getting closer, and she could hear at least 6 different voices shouting orders. Sarah had her sidearm and 3 spare magazines, along with her combat knife and the remaining explosive charges. It wasn't much against superior numbers, but she had something her enemies didn't expect: the desperate determination of someone fighting to protect innocent lives. As Sarah prepared to face impossible odds in the dense jungle, she thought about the oath she had taken when she joined the Navy. She had promised to defend her country and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Today, that promise would be tested to its absolute limit. The barking of the dogs grew louder, and Sarah could see flashlight beams cutting through the morning shadows. She found a defensive position behind a large fallen log and prepared for the fight of her life. 7 innocent people were depending on her courage and sacrifice. She would not let them down no matter what the cost. The jungle erupted in chaos as Sarah opened fire on the approaching search party. Her first shots took down the lead tracker and one of his dogs, immediately throwing the enemy into confusion. The remaining guards scattered, seeking cover behind trees and rocks while shouting orders to each other in their native language. Sarah had positioned herself well. The fallen log provided excellent cover, and the dense undergrowth made it difficult for her enemies to get a clear shot at her position. But she knew this advantage wouldn't last long. Once they realized she was alone, they would quickly surround her position and overwhelm her with superior firepower. The radio crackled with urgent communications as the enemy commander tried to coordinate his men. Sarah couldn't understand most of what was being said, but she recognized the tone of frustration and anger in their voices. They had discovered that their valuable hostages were gone, and now they faced an unknown number of armed rescuers. Sarah's strategy was simple but dangerous: make as much noise as possible, and convince the enemy that they were facing a larger force than just one Navy communications specialist. She fired from different positions, used her remaining explosive charges to create the impression of grenade attacks, and even threw rocks in opposite directions to simulate movement by multiple combatants. For 20 minutes, the deception worked. The enemy remained cautious, advancing slowly and calling for reinforcements from the main compound. But Sarah's ammunition was running low, and she knew it was only a matter of time before they discovered the truth. Through breaks in the gunfire, Sarah could hear the distant sound of helicopter rotors. The extraction team was approaching the rendezvous point, which meant the hostages should be safe soon. But the sound also told her that her time was running out. Once the helicopters landed and took off with the rescued prisoners, the enemy would realize they had been fooled by a single person. A voice called out in heavily accented English, "American soldier! We know you are alone now. Surrender and we will not kill you." Sarah responded by firing 2 quick shots in the direction of the voice, causing the speaker to dive for cover. She had no intention of surrendering. Even if they promised to spare her life, She knew what happened to captured American military personnel in situations like this. Her best chance was to keep fighting and hope that the Navy would send a second helicopter to extract her once the hostages were secure. But as Sarah shifted to a new firing position, disaster struck. The injured nurse she had helped escape had been weaker than Dr. Chen realized. Unable to keep up with the group, the woman had collapsed near the stream, still half a mile from the extraction point. Dr. Chen made the agonizing decision to stay with her patient while sending the others ahead to safety. The helicopter pilot, following standard protocol, refused to take off with only 5 of the 7 hostages. He demanded to know the location of the missing persons before he would leave the landing zone. Precious minutes ticked by as Dr. Chen tried to explain the situation over the radio, while Sarah continued her desperate holding action in the jungle. Meanwhile, the enemy had finally figured out Sarah's position and began coordinating a final assault. She could see muzzle flashes closing in from 3 directions, and bullets began splintering the log that protected her. A ricochet caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around and causing her to drop her rifle. Fighting through the pain, Sarah drew her sidearm and continued firing. But with only one functional arm and limited ammunition, she knew the end was near. The enemy voices grew closer, and she could hear them moving through the underbrush on both flanks of her position. Just as Sarah prepared for her final stand, the sound of automatic weapons fire erupted from an unexpected direction. A team of Navy SEALs deployed from the USS Steadfast after receiving Sarah's distress communications had infiltrated the island and tracked the firefight to her location. The arrival of 6 highly trained special operations soldiers immediately shifted the balance of the battle. The enemy fighters, who had been confident about overwhelming a single opponent, suddenly found themselves caught between Sarah's position and the advancing SEALs. Martinez, can you hear me? The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Jackson, the SEAL team leader. Here, Sarah called back, her voice weak from blood loss and exhaustion. Hostages are at the extraction point, but 2 are missing near the stream. Roger that. We'll handle the cleanup here. You need medical attention. The firefight continued for another 10 minutes, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The SEALs, with their superior training and equipment, systematically eliminated the enemy threats while Sarah provided covering fire from her position. When the shooting finally stopped, the jungle fell eerily silent except for the distant sound of helicopters. Commander Jackson reached Sarah's position first, immediately assessing her wounds. The shoulder injury was serious but not life-threatening, and she had several minor cuts from flying debris. But what concerned the medic most was the exhaustion and dehydration that came from 3 days of intense stress and physical exertion. "Ma'am, you've got some explaining to do," Jackson said as he applied a field dressing to her shoulder. "Your CO is not happy about you going off mission." Sarah managed a weak smile. "Did the hostages make it out?" "All 7, thanks to you. The doc and the injured nurse were picked up 20 minutes ago. Everyone's safe." As the medical helicopter lifted off from the jungle clearing, Sarah looked down at the island that had nearly become her grave. She thought about Dr. Chen and her team, about brave little Tommy, and about the nurse whose injuries had almost compromised the entire rescue operation. Every one of them was alive because she had chosen to act when action was needed most. The flight back to the USS Steadfast gave Sarah time to reflect on what she had done. She had disobeyed direct orders, risked an international incident, and nearly gotten herself killed in the process. But she had also saved 7 innocent lives and struck a blow against terrorists who preyed on humanitarian workers. Captain Rodriguez was waiting on the flight deck when the helicopter landed. His expression was unreadable as Sarah was helped out of the aircraft on a stretcher. She tried to stand and salute, but he gently pushed her back down. "Save your strength, Martinez. We'll have plenty of time to talk once you're patched up." As Sarah was wheeled toward the ship's medical bay, she could see crew members lining the walkways. Instead of the anger or disappointment she expected to see in their faces, she saw something else entirely: respect, admiration, and pride. Word of her actions had already spread throughout the ship, and everyone understood that they were in the presence of a genuine hero. But Sarah's ordeal was far from over. The physical wounds would heal, but she would soon face a different kind of challenge: a Navy review board that would have to decide whether her actions constituted heroic initiative or dangerous insubordination. The decision would determine Not only her military future but also set a precedent for how the Navy dealt with soldiers who chose conscience over orders in extreme circumstances. As the ship's doctor cleaned and stitched her wounds, Sarah closed her eyes and tried to rest. She had no regrets about her actions, regardless of the consequences she might face. Sometimes, she realized, doing the right thing meant being willing to risk everything, including your career, your freedom, and your life. The formal hearing began 3 weeks later at Naval Base San Diego. Sarah sat at the defendant's table, her left arm still in a sling from her shoulder wound, facing a panel of 5 senior officers who would determine her fate. The charges were serious: disobeying direct orders, conducting unauthorized military operations, and endangering lives through reckless action. Commander Patricia Hayes, the Navy prosecutor, presented a compelling case against Sarah. She argued that military discipline was the foundation of effective operations, and that allowing individual soldiers to ignore orders, regardless of their intentions, would undermine the entire chain of command. "Ladies and gentlemen of the panel," Commander Hayes stated,
"while we all admire Petty Officer Martinez's courage and her desire to help those in need,
we cannot allow personal judgment to override military protocol. If every service member decided to act independently based on their own moral compass, chaos would result." The prosecutor brought in experts who testified about the risks Sarah's actions had created. A hostage negotiation specialist explained how unauthorized rescue attempts often resulted in the deaths of the very people they were meant to save. An intelligence officer described how Sarah's mission compromise could have exposed other ongoing operations in the region. But Sarah's defense attorney, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Roberts, painted a very different picture. He called Dr. Elizabeth Chen as his first witness, and her testimony electrified the courtroom. "That young woman saved our lives," Dr. Chen said, her voice strong and clear. The conditions in that compound were deteriorating rapidly. One of the children had developed a high fever, and the injured nurse was showing signs of infection. "If Petty Officer Martinez hadn't acted when she did, I don't believe we would have survived another 24 hours. Tommy," the 8-year-old boy Sarah had comforted during the escape, provided the most powerful testimony of all. Despite his young age, he spoke clearly about their captivity and rescue. "The bad men were getting angrier every day," Tommy said, looking directly at Sarah with complete trust. "They said they were going to hurt us if nobody came to get us. But then Sarah came and she kept us safe. She's a hero." Lieutenant Colonel Roberts also called expert witnesses who supported Sarah's actions. A former hostage rescue specialist testified that Sarah's assessment of the deteriorating situation had been correct, and that waiting for official approval might have resulted in multiple casualties. A military psychologist explained how extreme circumstances sometimes required individuals to make split-second decisions that couldn't wait for committee approval. The most dramatic moment came when Captain Rodriguez took the stand. Sarah's commanding officer had been placed in an impossible position. He needed to support military discipline while acknowledging that his subordinate had achieved a remarkable success. "Petty Officer Martinez has been under my command for 2 years, Captain Rodriguez testified. "In that time, she has consistently demonstrated exceptional judgment, courage, and dedication to her fellow sailors and to the mission. While I cannot officially condone her decision to disobey orders, I must acknowledge that her actions saved 7 innocent lives." The prosecutor pressed Captain Rodriguez. "But surely you agree that military discipline requires obedience to orders, regardless of personal feelings?" "Absolutely," the captain replied. "But military discipline also requires us to protect innocent life when possible." Petty Officer Martinez found herself in a situation where these 2 principles came into conflict. She made a choice that any honorable sailor would be proud of. As the hearing progressed, Sarah noticed something unexpected happening in the gallery. Officers and enlisted personnel from across the base began attending the sessions, filling every available seat. Word of her actions had spread throughout the military community, and she had become a symbol of the values that drew people to military service in the first place. Letters of support poured in from around the world. Dr. Chen had contacted her medical colleagues, telling them about Sarah's heroic actions. The parents of the 3 rescued children wrote emotional testimonials about the young sailor who had risked everything to save their families. Even some international humanitarian organizations, despite their usual reluctance to become involved in military matters, submitted statements supporting Sarah's actions, but perhaps the most significant support came from an unexpected source. General Patricia Williamson, the highest-ranking woman in the Marine Corps, requested permission to testify as a character witness. Her testimony carried enormous weight with the panel. "I have reviewed Petty Officer Martinez's actions extensively," General Williamson stated. "While she technically violated protocol, she demonstrated the kind of moral courage and strategic thinking that we hope to instill in all our military personnel. Her ability to assess a rapidly changing situation and adapt her mission accordingly shows exactly the kind of leadership we need in today's complex world." The general's endorsement sparked a media frenzy. News organizations around the country picked up the story of the Navy woman who had risked everything to save innocent hostages. Public opinion polls showed overwhelming support for Sarah, with many Americans calling her a true hero and demanding that the Navy honor rather than punish her actions. As the hearing entered its final phase, Sarah was given the opportunity to speak on her own behalf. She stood slowly, her shoulder still causing her discomfort, and faced the panel of officers who would decide her future. "Honorable members of this panel," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the gravity of the moment, "I joined the Navy because I wanted to serve my country and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. When I took my oath, I promised to defend the Constitution and obey the orders of my superiors. I have never taken those promises lightly." She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. "But I also believe that our oath as military personnel includes a higher calling, to protect innocent life whenever possible. When I saw those hostages suffering, when I watched guards abuse children and deny medical care to sick people, I faced a choice between following orders and following my conscience." Sarah's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "I knew the risks. I knew I might be killed, captured, or court-martialed. But I also knew that 7 innocent people were depending on someone to act. If I had waited for official authorization, those people might have died while committees debated and politicians worried about international implications." The courtroom was completely silent as Sarah concluded her statement. "I don't regret my actions. I would make the same choice again if faced with identical circumstances. If that makes me unsuitable for military service, then I accept whatever punishment this panel deems appropriate. But I will never apologize for trying to save innocent lives." The panel deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, Admiral Rebecca Foster, the senior officer, announced their decision. The courtroom held its breath as she spoke. "Petty Officer Martinez, this panel finds that while your actions constituted a technical violation of orders, they were motivated by the highest principles of military service. Your courage, tactical skill, and moral judgment resulted in the successful rescue of 7 hostages without the loss of a single American life." Sarah felt her knees wobble as the Admiral continued. "However, we cannot ignore the fact that you disobeyed direct orders. Therefore, this panel recommends a formal reprimand be placed in your file, along with a commendation for extraordinary heroism under fire." The contradiction in the verdict, punishment and praise delivered simultaneously, reflected the impossible situation Sarah had faced and the difficult balance between military discipline and moral courage. But the story was far from over. As news of the verdict spread, something unprecedented began to happen. Military personnel from every branch of service started requesting transfers to serve under officers who had supported Sarah's actions. Letters flooded into the Pentagon from service members expressing their pride in serving alongside someone who embodied the best values of military service. The public response was even more dramatic. Sarah's story inspired a new generation of young Americans to consider military service, seeing in her example proof that the armed forces truly stood for protecting innocent life and defending justice. Recruitment numbers surged as people wanted to be part of an organization that produced heroes like Sarah Martinez. 3 months after the hearing, Sarah received orders that would change her life once again. She was being transferred to a new position at the Pentagon, where she would help develop new protocols for hostage rescue operations and humanitarian missions. Her experience, both positive and negative, would be used to train future military personnel in making difficult decisions under extreme pressure. On her last day aboard the USS Steadfast, Sarah stood on the deck watching the sun set over the Pacific Ocean. Captain Rodriguez approached her, carrying a small package wrapped in official Navy paper. "This came through official channels today," he said, handing her the package. "It's from the families of the people you rescued." Inside, Sarah found a simple wooden plaque with 7 signatures and a brief inscription. "To Sarah Martinez, our hero. Thank you for risking everything to bring us home. We will never forget your courage." Attached was a photograph showing Dr. Chen and her team reunited with their families, everyone smiling and healthy. But what touched Sarah most was a separate letter from Tommy, written in the careful handwriting of an 8-year-old boy. "Dear Sarah, thank you for saving us. When I grow up, I want to be brave like you. Can you teach me how to be a hero?" As Sarah prepared for the next chapter of her military career, she realized that her actions on that remote Pacific island had changed more than just 7 lives. She had helped redefine what it meant to be a military hero in the modern world, someone who could balance obedience with conscience, protocol with compassion, and duty with moral courage. The young woman who had once struggled to carry a teammate through basic training had become a symbol of everything the military aspired to be. But Sarah knew that her greatest challenge still lay ahead, living up to the example she had set and helping others find the courage to do what was right, even when it meant risking everything they held dear. 5 years had passed since Sarah's rescue mission, and her life had taken directions she never could have imagined. Her new position at the Pentagon had allowed her to influence military policy at the highest levels, helping to create new guidelines that balanced operational security with humanitarian concerns. But it was a phone call on a cold December morning that would bring her story full circle. "Sarah, this is Dr. Chen. I have some news that I think you'll want to hear in person. Can you meet me at the Marine Corps Memorial this afternoon?" Sarah had stayed in touch with all the rescued hostages over the years. Dr. Chen had returned to her humanitarian work. The teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had written a book about their experience, and the children had grown into remarkable young people. Tommy, now 13, had indeed maintained his desire to follow in Sarah's footsteps and was already talking about attending the Naval Academy. When Sarah arrived at the memorial, she found Dr. Chen standing with a large group of people she didn't immediately recognize. As she approached, Dr. Chen smiled and gestured toward the gathering. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet some people whose lives you've touched without even knowing it." One by one, the strangers introduced themselves. A young Marine corporal explained that Sarah's story had inspired him to enlist after college. A Navy nurse described how reading about Sarah's actions had motivated her to volunteer for dangerous humanitarian missions. A Coast Guard pilot told how Sarah's example had given her the courage to attempt a risky rescue during a hurricane that had saved an entire family. But the most surprising introduction came from a woman wearing the uniform of a Marine brigadier general. "Petty Officer Martinez," she said formally, then broke into a smile. "Actually, it's Admiral Martinez now, isn't it?" Sarah had been promoted several times since her rescue mission, eventually reaching the rank of admiral, a remarkable achievement for someone who had once faced court-martial. But she was confused by the general's formal greeting. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I don't think we've been properly introduced." The general extended her hand. "Brigadier General Linda Thompson, United States Marine Corps. I'm here representing 500 Marines who have requested permission to participate in a special ceremony." Dr. Chen stepped forward, her eyes bright with excitement. "Sarah, do you remember what you said to Tommy during the rescue? You told him that being a hero wasn't about being fearless. It was about doing what's right even when you're afraid." Sarah nodded, remembering the frightened little boy she had comforted in the jungle. Well, Tommy shared that story with his older brother, who was a Marine recruit at the time. The brother shared it with his training unit, and somehow it spread throughout the Marine Corps. Your words became an unofficial motto for an entire generation of Marines. General Thompson picked up the story. 3 months ago, we discovered that many of our most decorated Marines credit your example as their inspiration for joining the service. When word spread that we were planning something special, 500 Marines volunteered to participate, even though most of them have never met you personally. Sarah was speechless as General Thompson continued. Admiral Martinez, on behalf of the United States Marine Corps, we would like to request your presence at a ceremony next week. 500 Marines want to honor the Navy officer who taught them what it truly means to serve with honor. The ceremony took place on a crisp Saturday morning at Marine Corps Base Quantico. Sarah had been told to expect a small gathering, But as her car approached the parade ground, she was stunned by what she saw. Hundreds of Marines stood in perfect formation, their dress blue uniforms creating a sea of military precision and pride. But something was wrong. As Sarah stepped out of the car, she felt lightheaded and disoriented. The stress of the past week, combined with a lingering health issue she had been hiding, suddenly overwhelmed her. The parade ground began to spin and she felt herself falling. The last thing Sarah remembered was the sound of 500 Marines simultaneously shouting, "Admiral down!" as she collapsed unconscious onto the asphalt. When Sarah regained consciousness, she was lying on a stretcher surrounded by concerned faces. A Navy doctor was checking her pulse while Marine medics monitored her vital signs. But what struck her most was the wall of Marines that had formed a protective circle around her, their faces showing genuine worry and care. "What happened?" Sarah asked weakly. "You fainted, ma'am," replied the doctor. "You've been pushing yourself too hard lately." And your body finally said enough. As Sarah's vision cleared, she realized that all 500 Marines were still standing at attention, waiting to see if she was okay. Despite the disruption to their ceremony, not a single Marine had broken formation or left their post. General Thompson knelt beside the stretcher. "Admiral, the ceremony can wait. Your health is what matters now." Sarah struggled to sit up, despite the protests of the medical team. "No, these Marines came here to honor service and sacrifice. We're not canceling anything because I got a little dizzy." With the help of 2 Marines, Sarah managed to stand and walk to the reviewing platform. Her legs were still shaky, but her voice was strong as she addressed the assembled troops. "Marines, I'm told that my actions 5 years ago inspired some of you to serve. But standing here today, looking at your dedication and professionalism, I realize that you have inspired me far more than I could ever inspire you." Sarah's voice carried across the silent parade ground as she continued. "When I rescued those hostages, I was terrified. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a scared young sailor trying to do the right thing. But you have shown me that heroism isn't about feeling brave. It's about serving something greater than yourself. Even when you're afraid, even when you're tired, even when you collapse from exhaustion." The Marines remained at perfect attention, but Sarah could see emotion in their eyes as she spoke. "You honor me today not because I'm perfect, but because I represent the values that drive all of us to serve. Every one of you makes the same choice I made every day, to put duty before comfort, service before self, and the safety of others before your own well-being." As Sarah concluded her remarks, something unprecedented happened. Without any command being given, 500 Marines simultaneously began to applaud. The sound echoed across the base, a thunderous tribute to the woman who had taught them that true courage comes from the heart, not from the absence of fear. Later, as Sarah was finally examined by doctors, she learned that her fainting spell had been caused by a combination of exhaustion and anemia, serious but treatable, conditions that had developed from years of pushing herself beyond normal limits in service to her country. But the Marines' response to her moment of weakness had taught her something profound about leadership and heroism. True strength wasn't about never falling down. It was about inspiring others to stand up, even when you couldn't stand yourself. Tommy, now a confident teenager with dreams of attending the Naval Academy, visited Sarah in the hospital the next day. "Sarah," he said, using the familiar name he had called her since he was 8 years old, "I finally understand what you meant about being brave when you're scared. You were scared today, weren't you? But you still did what those Marines needed you to do." Sarah smiled at the young man who had grown up with her story as his guide. "That's right, Tommy. And someday when you're wearing a uniform of your own, you'll discover that the best leaders are the ones who are honest about their fears and weaknesses. That's how you earn the right to ask others to be brave." As Sarah recovered from her collapse, she realized that her story had come full circle. She had started as a young sailor trying to prove she was tough enough for military service. But she had learned that true strength came not from never failing, but from inspiring others to succeed even when you stumbled. The 500 Marines who had gathered to honor her had instead taught her the greatest lesson of her career. Heroism isn't a solo act. It's about creating a legacy of service that lives on in the hearts and actions of those who come after you. And in that moment, lying in a hospital bed surrounded by flowers and letters from Marines around the world, Sarah Martinez finally understood what it truly meant to be a hero.